Valentine's Day last night, Joni and I ate crab, and I made her listen to my talk. With the crab, you gotta listen to the talk. Okay, and I have to admit, I have found this book kind of cumbersome. I think it's just the dated language and the repetition, which is typical of a lot of these older texts because they weren't written down for a really long time. So I was kind of just muddling about, trying to kind of get my bearings. And then I realized if I just went through and read it and crossed out the parts that were repetitions of, like almost identical repetitions of some other paragraph, it was a lot less and it was easier to understand. So that's my secret. Okay, well, I want to start by reading what's actually the last page in a chapter of a book.
Before lecture.
Oh, before lecture chance. Can't do anything without you guys.
No.
Unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Okay. So as I was saying, I used as a supplemental text a book called The Buddha's Teachings on Prosperity, which are a little bit more oriented to laity, and also it's a lot more practical. Has a lot more practical information in it. But the very last paragraph in their chapter about settling disputes, I want to share with you. The Buddha and his disciple Shariputra offered their community members invaluable guidance to deal peacefully with interpersonal conflicts. The improvement of communication skills and the development of skillful attitudes and behavior are required for this purpose. The Buddha emphasized that most problems arising in close relationships can be dealt with successfully through these methods. Yet some relationships are liable to fail however hard one tries to make them work. On such occasions, separation would be the most effective way to free oneself from the burden of conflicts. One needs to regard separation not as a method of revenge, but as a step to help oneself and one's partner. One of my favorite parts about studying for talks is I like to look up words because I found that more often than not, my working definition of a word is colored by my experience. So I looked up the word dispute, and it has a few different origins, from the Middle English disputin, from Old French disputere, from the Latin disputare, to dispute, discuss, examine, compute, estimate, and from dis, meaning apart, and putere, meaning to reckon, consider, think, originally make clean, or clear up. And then I got sort of seduced into synonyms, which are hilarious. So the Scots call disputes argy-bargy. In the mid-16th century, they called it ding-donging. Here, we call it quibbling, squabbling, trifling, or having a falling out. And the definition of resolution, I like to think of it as a verb, that it's to find a solution, conclusion, to decide or determine. So in the beginning of this chapter on settling disputes, chapter 9, Bhikkhu Bodhi goes into detail about the resolution of conflicts between different groups, Sangha members, lay versus monastic. But I want to take a more general approach and not spend too much time about the information that's designed for people living together in a monastery, but rather disputes among Sangha members or Sangha members and others. He begins by pointing out that there are two kinds of fools and two kinds of wise people. Fools who do not see a transgression as a transgression, and one who, when another is confessing a transgression, does not pardon them. And a wise person sees a transgression as a transgression, and one who, when another is confessing a transgression, pardons them. So there are a lot of different kinds of disputes. In the Sangha, there can be a dispute about the Dharma itself. And there are three ways that this can happen. Well, actually two. Because if we agree on the meaning and the phrasing of a portion of Dharma, then we don't have a conflict. But if we differ regarding the meaning but agree on the phrasing, then we have a problem. And he says in here, let them not fall into dispute. What is wrongly grasped should be borne in mind as wrongly grasped. What is rightly grasped as rightly grasped. What is Dharma and what is discipline should be expounded. And my take on that is that that's where your guiding teacher comes in. There's always a little bit difference in interpretation, but if the difference in interpretation is really huge, then you need someone to clarify it. And lastly, we can differ on the phrasing, but agree on the meaning. And he says, just don't even be bothered by that. It's trifling because you're agreeing on the meaning. Excuse me. Sometimes there are divisions in a Sangha, and their recommended method for calming the situation is to have a wise monk from each side stand and in turn say, let the Venerable Sangha hear me. When we took to quarreling and brawling and were deep in disputes, we said and did many things improper for a bodhisattva. If it is approved by the Sangha, then for the good of these venerable ones and for my own good, in the midst of the Sangha, I shall confess by the method called covering over with grass. Any offenses these venerable ones and any offenses of my own, except for those that call for serious censure and those connected with the laity. And so I think what something like that does is calm the situation and hopefully lead to more reflection by the parties on both sides. Sometimes there's a dispute between a specific Sangha members, and they suggest that the most important thing is that they both reflect upon themselves, the monk who has committed the offense and the monk who reproves him. They must reflect upon themselves. If they do so, it will not lead to residual resentments. And this one I like, mutual correction, and that's the correction between members of the Sangha. And they were very specific in stating that your standing in the Sangha has nothing to do with who you correct or who corrects you, if it's done with compassion. As skillfully as possible, mutual correction can happen. It supports the Sangha. And I think the pivotal thing in this is intention and compassion. The precepts talk a lot about right speech. And Shariputra said in the numerical discourses that when you talk to others, you may place yourself in the following 5 positions. I will speak at the right time. I will present facts. I will use soft language. I will speak for the listener's benefit, and I will talk with compassion. Excuse me. And then kind of jumping back to the previous book, the Buddha's Teachings on Prosperity, they list 5 steps to skillful communication. And these are essentially the same, but they elaborate a little bit. It should be the right time. So you should consider the mental and physical state of the listener. You know, if they're not in a great mood or they're not feeling well, they're probably not going to be able to listen to you very well. And to speak about facts, to speak about only what has happened, not to attach a meaning of your own or to amplify the situation. To use soft language. Avoid rough or polarizing language. Do not speak in anger, but rather in disciplined words. And that, I think, is really, really important, because once a situation gets polarized, then there's separation, and you can't really hear each other without that connection. And then to speak with the focus of positive effects of the solution. Why is this a problem? Why does it need to be solved? And how will the listener benefit from it being solved? And to speak with genuine compassion for the listener. An action will be meaningful or fruitful if motivated by true compassion. And then they also kind of threw in a few other guidelines. Refrain from arguing on sensitive topics, which was sort of funny because it was like politics or religion. Well, yeah. Understand that some aspects of behavior are unchangeable. Provide an opportunity for improvement. And if unable to resolve a conflict, seek a harmonious separation. So part of what they talked about in terms of a monastic community living together is, you know, what would be grounds for expelling somebody, and that gets quite serious. But I was remembering in a sangha that I used to practice with, we had a monthly study group, and we would read a text, and then people would discuss things. And there was one member of the sangha that would start out in her comments to do that, and then we would quickly get on a political issue, and she would just get really, really, really worked up, and it was just really fragmenting to the whole group, and some people stopped coming because of it. And then eventually the guiding teacher just had to sit that person down and say, you know, if you can't avoid talking about political things, then this probably isn't the study group for you. And you know, that's not an easy thing to do. I've had my fair share of disputes with people. I don't really have disagreements with people in terms of Dharma, because I think the Dharma speaks for itself, and it's in many ways open to interpretation, and I don't think that you have to think the same thing that I think. I think there's a lot of room. Sometimes there are just personality conflicts. I don't know if Susan Spencer's on screen, but we just really didn't like each other when we met. We just butted heads all the time. She was a senior student, and she felt she wanted to be very helpful to me as an enthusiastic new student who wanted to do a lot of things. And so we butted heads all the time. And I remember that I took it upon myself to organize a Doan schedule. And I was going to send this email out to ask people if they were interested. And I don't know, we were sewing, or we were doing something down in the Zendo. And I said, well, I'm going to go talk to Tony, the guiding teacher, about sending this out. And Susan said, well, I think I should look at that first. She didn't say it like that, but I heard it like that. And so I just got really ticked off. So I go upstairs to Tony, and I said, Susan wants to read this so she can approve it. And he just started laughing. And he goes, oh, if you'd known her a couple of years ago, you would really appreciate that. So And I think it's like that for a lot of us. I know that one of my biggest struggles is right speech in terms of being flippant and sometimes too sarcastic, which, you know, if it's for my own amusement, that's fine. But when I share it with other people and it's offensive or causes problems, then I need to take responsibility. And I tried to do that. I always talk too fast. Okay, so we have a half an hour until service. So we could do 20 minutes of small groups. And can you do the counting thing and figure out what size the group should be?
Well, that is up to you. 2, 3, you tell me, and then I do the counting thing, once I know what you want.
Okay. Well, if we're gonna have 20 minutes, I think maybe 3 or 4 people in a group?
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Okay, we're in agreement. And I guess what's of interest to me to hear is, you know, what has been your experience with conflicts? What are the techniques you've been able to use to resolve some of them? And have you had situations where you really just had to walk away? And also, I like tricks, any little tricks. Like counting to 5 before you say anything. And, you know, I mean, now I have this kind of semi-successful internal monitoring of my witty comments. Where I ask myself, is this gonna add something? Is this gonna be helpful, or am I just amusing myself at the expense of other people? So, anyway, that's what we'll do. So, if it's 3 or 4 people in a group,
It's gonna be 2 or 3.
2 or 3. So like 5 or 10 minutes each. I don't know, you guys can figure that out.
I have a question.
Yes.
Were you and Susan able to resolve?
Oh, we're the best of friends now. I adore her.
Good to
But,
hear.
yeah.
And you both know